So here we're just going to talk about lighting a little bit to get you started. This is the perspective window. This is the image that's been rendered without any lights, just the default lights. So all your windows, your orthographic views and perspective view will by default say default lighting. You'll need to turn on two-sided lighting. Sometimes otherwise you'll have a dark hole on the inside of things, like as if a cup or something. But what we want to do is create two lights here that accentuate the texture we've created. So I'm going to first click this little icon that will save the image you currently rendered. It's just temporarily saved in the buffer there. I'm going to create lights. I'm going to say directional light. Then what I'm going to do, go back to the 4 view, and you can see that little set of arrows. That's the lights, and as everything else, they're created at 0, 0, 0. What I like to do is go under one of the panels, in this case the top view, and say look through selected. The lights are selected. That direct light is selected. That's why the arrows are green. So now I'm actually seeing what that light sees. Now the next thing I'd like to do is I can now move the lights around as if it was the camera. In other words, I'm seeing through the lights, and I'm using the same tools, the command key or alt key and the left, middle, and right mouse arrows. Now if I come over to this perspective window and I say let's use all lights, that means not the default lights, but whatever other lights are on in the scene. And in this case, I have one other light on, the directional light, the one I just created. So you can see where it's we're getting kind of a dark shadow here. Let me do a couple things to make this easier. I'm going to turn off the wireframe, and I'm going to get rid of the what's called the resolution gate. That's that box. And let's even get rid of I think it's a heads-up display. I'll try it real quick. If I can't find it, I won't. Yeah, poly count, so we don't have that blocking us. Okay. So you can see this dark now, two-sided lighting is on, and this dark now is just the mechanical or mathematical result of the beams of light being calculated as it hits the surface. And since the beams can't reach the side because I've angled the light from here, it stays dark. If we go way out, if we scroll out, you can probably barely see because it's so small, but down here in the front view, there's my light and there's my model. Okay. Even if I scale that, I don't think I can scale I can scale the icon lighter or larger, I'm sorry, but it doesn't increase the brightness or the intensity of the light. But at least that way you can see it easier, okay? This from the window I'm using, that's called direct light. In other words, this is the one I said look through selected. Those 3 lines now represent the light. So as I position them, I position the way the light is reflecting. So if I want to go from upper left hand lighting, do something like that. Okay, now let's see what we can do to get rid of this absence of information, this dark area. So what we could do is create another light, and in this case I'm going to create an ambient light. Directional lights, they beam light like the sun, big broad source, but all from one direction, just the way these arrows are showing. An ambient light, in contrast, beams from a circle, and that circle radiates out in all directions. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the value or the intensity of that ambient light way down so it doesn't compete with my direct light. Now if you're in talking to a photographer, for example, they'll say that this is the fill light and the direct light would be your key light. A lot of times, to try to make it easy for me to find how that ambient light is affecting it, I will make a very odd color, and then I can decide how much intensity I really want. And one thing you're going to have to prepare for, what you see here on the monitor and what you get when you render are often not exactly the same thing. So don't be discouraged. Okay. So now let's take that and maybe make it 4. That's too soft. Okay, now I'm going to take the color of the light down, so it's not as bright. Now once I've done that, maybe I want to make it a little stronger. Let's try that. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the directional light, and I'm going to change its color as well. And again, by default, the directional light will come, will start, and all the lights will start at an intensity of 1. So you may want to adjust those. I very rarely do I use lights whose intensity is larger than 1. I think I'm still going to take that other ambient light down just a little bit, because it's just putting a little too much violet in there. And you'd be surprised at sometimes how little you have to change it. There you go, that's a little better. Okay, so now let's render this. And the ambient light, I actually didn't do anything with it. It's sitting right there still at 0, 0. I can also move it to try to focus more on it being, in a position opposite the source light, if you will. Move it down, keep it behind it, keep it on this side, and maybe back behind it even more. So let's see what we get here now. There you go. That's not too bad. You can see. And one other thing I want to point out to y'all, this is I didn't get to talk about in class. You can see quite how bright that is there. We're using a shader called a blend shader. That's the name of the mathematician that created it. And here's my blend shader here. One thing you notice is there's reflectivity. I've turned it down. If you look at it, this is what it is by default. Now you probably won't notice a lot of difference in that image, but if we go back to the render window for a second, I don't know if I minimized or hit it. I think I must have thrown it away. Oh, here it is. Okay. I'll get it for you in 1 sec. So let's save that image. And now let's re-render. So you can see how, because the reflectivity is up, those blend shaders will create a bit of an artificial light. Like it almost will begin to compete with the light area. So to compensate for that, you generally want to take the reflectivity down a little bit. The other thing you can do that we'll talk about a lot more later is you can adjust how big and how intense that highlight is. If you notice up here, watch what happens as I change the specular color, specular roll off, and the eccentricity. Okay. Alright, so we'll save this one more time. Render with a little smaller roll off and eccentricity and a lower reflectivity, and there you go. So you see, that would just keep the highlights a little more reasonable. So if we keep this, we can look at as with the high reflectivity. This is with it originally without the modified highlight, and this is what it looked like originally without any of the lights. Okay, so that's it for the lighting lesson.